What's up, everybody? Welcome to another top 10, in this case top 15 of the year. This time we're doing my top 15 best movies of the year. I said it in my top 10 most disappointed of the year that I didn't think that 2022 has been as great as 2021 was. There hasn't been a single movie this year. There's been no Coda this year. There's been no The Suicide Squad or West Side Story, but just movies that I absolutely loved. But you know what? It's still been a pretty solid year. We've had a lot of absolute bangers. It was kind of tough to narrow it down to just 15 movies, so I do have a couple of honorable mentions to list off first, and those are Bones and All, a really bizarre love story involving cannibalism, The Outfit, a movie that wasn't even on my radar at all and then turned out to be great, and The Fallout, which it has Jenna Ortega in it. Do I need to say more? Just two things that I want to make note of real quick before I start. First of all, I'm not going to be discussing spoilers in this other than maybe some mild plot spoilers, so if you're really worried about it, just watch the movies first before you check out this video. The other thing I want to say is that I have not seen every movie that has come out this year, obviously. If you look on my Letterboxd, I've ranked 91 movies so far that I've seen this year, but there are a couple big ones that I missed, such as the new Puss in Boots movie, The Fabelmans by Steven Spielberg, and lastly, The Whale, which I'm really dying to see, but just is not showing anywhere around me. So those three are kind of disqualified from the list. Maybe they would be on it, maybe they wouldn't, but just wanted to put that out there. Kicking off the list at number 15, we have Scream. This is a little bit of a weird one. I'm a little bit biased towards the Scream franchise because it's my favorite horror franchise. I'm not even a big slasher person, but when it comes to Scream, you can sort of have your cake and eat it too, because these movies love to poke fun at the horror genre and all of the tropes associated with that, while also indulging in those tropes at the same time. So you get your gore, you get your kills, you get a lot of the cliches that a lot of us are kind of tired of, but this movie is self-aware of that, just like the other Scream movies. So you get the horror, you get the scares, you get the funny self-aware jokes, and you get a whodunit all in one package. That's why I love the Scream franchise. And this was the first Scream film to be made without Wes Craven behind the camera, so I was really sort of nervous to see how it would turn out. Surprisingly, I really like the new characters. Some of them aren't so great. Sam, played by Melissa Barrera, isn't the greatest lead. I thought the acting performance could have been better, but a lot of the supporting characters, even the ones that didn't make it, I found to be at the very least intriguing and entertaining to watch. The legacy characters did sort of get sidelined in this one. Sidney Prescott is like my favorite final girl of all time, and she doesn't even really show up until the final third of the movie. But again, the Scream franchise just has this draw for me that I just absolutely love watching them, and I can rewatch this movie over and over again and still have a lot of fun with it. When it is revealed who the killer is and what their motive is, this is easily one of the silliest motives that a Scream movie has done, and some would probably argue that it's a little too silly, even for this franchise, but I don't know, I still thought it was a nice commentary on toxic fandom and how fans react to a product that they are not happy with, which is something that's very relevant in cinema today. Again, my one big gripe with it is that the legacy characters weren't used as much as I wanted them to be. With the exception of David Arquette, he's actually really good in this, and he provides a lot of heart to the movie that I just did not expect going into it. So yeah, Scream absolutely makes it onto the list. Number 14 is Avatar: The Way of Water. Now before I dive into this one, I should probably sort of tell everyone what my thoughts are on the first Avatar, because I know a lot of people just don't like these two Avatar films at all. And I will say the story in both of these movies does have some holes. It's kind of a generic Pocahontas origin story with the first Avatar, and here we have another simplistic sort of formulaic tale of a man who's trying to protect his family. That's about as simple as it gets. But man, this thing is just visual spectacle on a whole new level. I mean, the environments on Pandora and the characters and the creatures, they just look incredible. I mean, I think it's probably the best looking movie. The Way of Water, the sequel, is the best looking movie I have ever seen in a cinema. I just can't think of a single film that could top it. And while I still think the original Avatar is good, I think this sequel might actually edge it out a little bit, because I think the family dynamic is a little more relatable and a little more interesting than just having an ex-Marine who, you know, wants to become one of these avatars so that he can walk again. I don't know. I found his character to be a bit boring in the first movie. Here, Jake Sully is relatable because he's got all these children who are very vibrant and entertaining to watch, and the movie is about him trying to protect them. Again, I thought all of the kids were entertaining and interesting characters, maybe with the exception of Spider. I feel like there was potential there, and they didn't quite realize that potential fully, and he makes some choices later on in the film that I just found to be a little bit unearned. The return of Colonel Quaritch also feels a little bit ham-fisted, like they sort of didn't know for sure if they wanted to bring him back, and they were like, oh, we do want to bring him back, so how do we do it? Well, let's just say that we had a memory chip saved from him, and we can now just put it in this avatar body, and there you have it. Another thing is that Cameron does struggle with the dialogue a little bit. There are a lot of characters in this movie that speak in riddles, like, oh, the way of water has no beginning and no end. A lot of just existential shit like that kind of got on my nerves a little bit. But man, none of that really mattered to me when I'm sitting there and I'm just glued to the screen because what I'm watching is so visually incredible. We just don't get enough movies nowadays that feel like genuine cinematic spectacle. So I think it's important to cherish that when we do get it, and Avatar: The Way of Water is most definitely an example of that. Number 13 is The Black Phone, directed by Scott Derrickson. I've always been a fan of Scott Derrickson. I think even his worst movies are at least okay, but he really got put on the radar for me when he made Sinister, which was just one of the scariest horror movies I had seen at the time. Then he went on to do Doctor Strange and sort of branch out and do some other things. Now he's going back to a straightforward horror film in The Black Phone. But it isn't too simplistic. It also does have a nice message about sort of standing up for yourself. Ethan Hawke is really creepy in this movie as the Grabber, who is the main antagonist. But the child performances are what really surprised me here. The main character, the actor who plays him, does a great job of, putting the viewer in the mindset that he's in when he's in this isolated basement, trapped with nothing but a mattress and a black phone, where the ghosts of these dead children are now talking to him and trying to help him escape. It's really a fine mixture of both creepy and endearing. It's difficult to explain. Another performance that really surprised me, though, is the main character's sister. And they have a little bit of challenge in their home life because their father is abusive. And there's that one scene where he's whipping them with the belt. And it is just, wow, just what a powerful scene thanks to all the performances. Just really well done. The movie does occasionally feel a little bit derivative of some Stephen King stories where you have these generic bullies and you've got characters that have psychic visions. But none of that really compromised the movie for me. I was really just enthralled from start to finish. And being that this was Scott Derrickson, I did expect it to at least be decent, but I did not expect it to be on my top 15 of the year. Number 12 is going to be Nope, directed by Jordan Peele, and this is really Jordan Peele's sort of commentary on humankind's obsession with spectacle and trying to control nature as a means to yield spectacle. Of course, above all else, it's an alien movie, it's a UFO movie, but it also has a lot of really great metaphors when you come to Stephen King's character and Gordy the Chimp, which is eerily similar to some real-life events that occurred with a woman's pet chimp that escaped and sort of wreaked havoc. This is a tough one to talk about if I don't want to spoil anything, because there are a lot of twists and turns in the story where things are revealed and you're like, oh, this is going to be a little bit different of a movie than I thought it was going to be. But I was really pleasantly surprised by this. I wasn't a huge fan of Us. I thought that was a little bit of a step down from Get Out. So for me, this is a little bit of a return to form for Jordan Peele. He's so great with suspense, and I don't want to compare this movie to Jaws because I don't think it's anywhere near as good as Jaws, but he does a lot of clever things that I would imagine Spielberg doing. For instance, there are sequences where there will be clouds motionless in the sky, and the movie plays with the whole suspense of whether or not the UFO could be hiding in that cloud. Just really clever visual gimmicks that sort of keep you on edge through the whole movie. The performances are, of course, great. There's a lot of humor in here, just like with any Jordan Peele movie. I did feel that Daniel Kaluuya was a little bit too subdued. It's one thing to write an introverted character, and it's another thing when I couldn't understand half the words that were coming out of his mouth because he was so quiet. But the rest of the characters in this movie were totally vibrant, totally memorable. And it's just, no one makes elevated horror quite like Jordan Peele, and I will always respect him for that. Hanging just outside of the top 10 at number 11 is Babylon, a movie that apparently nobody saw, which really sucks because, man, I really like this movie. Damien Chazelle is easily one of my favorite filmmakers working today. He's just made so many classics already, like Whiplash and La La Land. The movie is both a eulogy and a condemnation of 1920s Hollywood and the sort of lifestyle that is associated with that culture at the time. Right from the get-go, there's tons of sex, drug use, violence, literally elephants shitting on people. I mean, this movie is pretty much just 3 hours of absolute, unchecked insanity, and I love that about it. Margot Robbie and Diego Calva are definitely the standouts here. I like Brad Pitt too. His role just wasn't quite as significant as the other two. He wasn't bad by any means. It's just that the other two stood out a little bit more than him. Margot Robbie is absolutely incredible in this movie, but Diego Calva, in a way, is sort of the POV that the audience experiences this film through because he's the one that's sort of just getting into Hollywood. He's trying to break into the business. The idea that your work as a film star is immortalized, meanwhile you as the star are not immortal, is explored a lot through this movie, and I thought that was a really interesting thing to choose that a lot of movies that are sort of about Hollywood and about the making of movies don't really acknowledge. And sort of watching how these characters deal with that revelation on their own was really interesting. I do think the movie is a bit too long. I mean, this thing is 3 hours and 8 minutes. So this was the second movie in 1 week that I had watched in theaters that was 3 hours long after Avatar: The Way of Water. And I was like, yeah, I mean, I do love this movie, but it doesn't need to be 3 hours long. They could probably have shaved off 20. That's why it's not in the top 10. Let's move on. Number 10 is going to be X, Ty West's throwback to 1970s slashers like the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, most notably, in which a group of characters set up a porn shoot inside of the guest house of this older couple, and it quickly becomes apparent that these two older people are a little bit unhinged in the head. Above all else, what made me sort of fall in love with this movie is that there's a lot more to it than just the blood and gore and sex. There are actual conversations between the characters in this movie that are really interesting and thought-provoking because they have different opinions on what film should be, and specifically what their film that they're trying to make should be. Can adult videos be a form of art, or is it exclusively a form of crude gratification meant to be consumed and quickly forgotten? And that's not to say that the movie holds back when it comes to the kills. There are some really gnarly ones in here that just feel like they go on forever. And you know who else kills it? Mia Goth. She plays two characters in this movie, one of which I didn't even know about until the end because the makeup and the performance were so good. The woman is very talented, and this is not the last time we will be seeing her on the list. Number 9 is going to be Tar, a fascinating, if overlong, examination of cancel culture from sort of an unbiased lens. Cate Blanchett plays this character who is a prominent musician who has allegedly done some pretty, let's say, unethical things in the past. But the movie never really tries to force you into taking one particular side in this movie. It's just sort of a really brilliant and very organic character study. Blanchett is really what makes this movie work, man. I mean, it wouldn't be much without her. That's not to say it's a poorly written film or anything, but it's 3 hours long again, or at least almost 3 hours long. So yeah, her performance carries the movie for me. Also, if you're a big fan of music, especially classical music, this film delves into that a lot, particularly in the opening. There's like a 30-minute prologue to this movie that is literally two characters sitting down and conversing about classical music, and there's a lot of name dropping and jargon that I didn't really pick up on, so this might be a little bit of a niche movie. A lot of maybe generic audiences won't find as much to love in this. It's a talky film for sure, but for the most part I would say that it's absolutely riveting, and any cinephile or someone who just likes music or film in general should definitely check this one out. Number 8 is the Banshees of Inisherin, and this is one that just totally flew under my radar. Didn't even know the film existed. I heard a little bit of buzz about it, decided to check it out. And this is, I don't really even know how to explain this movie. It sort of defies categorization to a certain extent. Colin Farrell and Brendan Gleeson play these two really close friends. One day, Brendan Gleeson wakes up, and he no longer wants to be friends with Colin Farrell. That's the setup. It sounds really simple, but this movie definitely goes in a lot of bizarre, sometimes horrific directions that I did not expect it to go into, especially as a movie that's clearly meant to be taken as sort of a comedy. I don't really know what more I want to say without spoiling anything because, again, I feel like this is one of those movies that you want to go into without knowing much about it. But what I will say is that Farrell and Gleeson are both excellent in this movie, and you even get a nice supporting appearance from Barry Keoghan, who is just really popping off lately. There's a lot of really beautiful scenic shots of coastal Ireland that I was just absolutely enthralled by. And I was really surprised by how emotionally touching this movie was in its concluding moments when, again, it's sort of a blending of all these different genres. But those tend to be the movies that I'm really liking lately, are the movies that are bold, they go in a different direction than you would expect them to go. And this is absolutely an example of that. Number 7 is Pearl, and this is the prequel to Ty West's X, that also stars Mia Goth, this time as the old woman in X named Pearl. And this is sort of a blending of drama and horror, but it's really just a character study that shows us how this woman became the psychopath that we see in X. Given the parallels between Maxine and Pearl, given that they both have a strong desire to become Hollywood stars, I think it's really fitting that she plays both characters, and she is absolutely fantastic here. I mean, there is a 6-minute sequence in this movie with 0 cuts in which she delivers a monologue, and it is absolutely it is really something to behold. If I had any say in it, she would probably get a nomination for Best Actress at the Academy Awards. I know it's not going to happen, but it really should, man. Why don't they recognize horror? Coming in at number 6 is going to be Barbarian. This is one of the few horror movies this year, even though there are a lot on this list. This is one of the few that genuinely scared me. And I'm not just talking about jump scares, making me jolt in my seat. No, this movie has some genuinely really good suspense. I will not be staying in an Airbnb alone for a while. Thank you, Barbarian. Again, this is one of those movies that I don't want to talk about the plot too specifically because it's one of those films that evolves and changes right up until the final scene. And I think it's really the best to go in without knowing too much about it. There are a lot of clever misdirects here that make you think the movie's going one way and then it goes the complete opposite way. Georgina Campbell puts in a really good performance here too, and I had never really heard of her before, so that was kind of a nice surprise. Justin Long is also in the movie. He has a very interesting role. Did not expect him to be in the movie at all because it wasn't shown in any of the marketing. I don't really think that's a spoiler though. I haven't told you anything about the character. If there's one thing that holds Barbarian back from being higher up on the list, it's probably that the characters do make some dumb decisions in this movie occasionally. And I know it's tough to write intelligent characters in a horror movie, especially one that's grounded in realism like this. Because in reality, most people with any amount of brain cells would probably just GTFO when something like this happens. But it doesn't compromise the movie for me. I'm okay with stupid character decisions happening every once in a while, if they're at least for good reasons, and I think this movie sort of justifies those bad decisions, at least enough so that I can let them go and just sort of enjoy the film for what it is. And man, this one, there's some shocking shit in this movie, man. Breaking into the top 5, first up we have The Batman. I was a little bit worried going into this that it would sort of feel like a copy and paste of the Christopher Nolan Batman movies where it's just a sort of darker tone. But no, Matt Reeves put his unique stamp on this movie really well by sort of essentially making it a detective story with Batman as the detective, which was really clever. The neo-noir atmosphere of Gotham City and the look of it and everything in this movie is fantastic. This might actually be my favorite interpretation of Gotham City that we've ever gotten in live action. Robert Pattinson is excellent as this sort of more emo version of Batman, as the internet has been saying, and it is kind of the case. Paul Dano, really creepy as the Riddler. It kind of feels like a horror movie at times, quite honestly. Even Colin Farrell puts in a pretty incredible performance. The makeup is great. As the Penguin, he looks pretty much unrecognizable. That whole car chase sequence with the Penguin, too, just honestly, probably one of the best scenes in cinema that I've seen this year. If I'm trying to pick a specific scene that I thought was the best shot, the best looking, and just the most thrilling, that entire sequence was really good. Zoe Kravitz as Catwoman, I really like too. I haven't really hated any of the interpretations of Catwoman that we've gotten live action so far, except for, well, Halle Berry. I'm sorry. Like a lot of the movies that I've been sort of nitpicking at in this list, I do think the Batman is a little bit longer than it needs to be. So many movies that are just kind of padding out their runtimes lately, but again, I think it's worth sort of slogging through the slower stretches to get through this movie because it is such a unique interpretation of the character and the one that we deserve. Number 4 is The Northmen, a relentlessly brutal and bleak Viking revenge story that I didn't see coming at all. I do like Robert Eggers as a filmmaker. Of course, he did The Lighthouse, which I really loved. He did The Witch. I thought that was an alright horror film. I wasn't as positive on it as some of the other people were. But again, I just didn't expect this movie to have the sizable budget that it had. Really, there's a lot more action and just brutal violence in this movie than I would have expected. This is like, if you're a fan of rated R, just super hardcore violent movies, this is the one for you to watch. Alexander Skarsgård, Nicole Kidman, Anya Taylor-Joy, they're all great in this. You wouldn't expect any less from them. The performances, along with all the gorgeous scenery, and even some of the more fantastical elements in the movie that I didn't expect, combined to create a truly memorable epic. I mean, there's a scene in this movie in which there are 2 nude men sword fighting on top of an active volcano. I mean, you just can't get that anywhere else. So yeah, absolutely love The Northman. It deserves a spot in the top 5. Coming in at number 3 is going to be Everything Everywhere All at Once, the movie that I think so many people have been buzzing about this year. And for me, this is sort of what I wish the Multiverse of Madness was. Not that Multiverse of Madness was bad per se, but this movie is just, it's kind of indescribable. I mean, come on, man. It features Michelle Yeoh as a middle-aged woman who's trying to keep her family afloat in the current economical state. And she learns to do so by fighting off a multiversal evil by inhabiting her alternate selves in other universes and using their fighting techniques. That is just such a crazy premise for a movie, especially one that's a little bit more low budget. A24 usually doesn't output something this crazy and just chaotic, but they do here. Amid the chaos, there's hot dog fingers, there's Jamie Lee Curtis going full-on psycho, there's rocks with googly eyes having a conversation. There's just so much going on here, and it's a lot to process. But I just love when a movie absolutely goes for it and doesn't really care what the reception is going to be on it. And I think this is absolutely an example of that paying off big time. I don't think that this is one of the greatest films ever made, as some people have made it out to be. I see on Letterboxd it's like the 13th best rated movie of all time. I don't think it's quite on that level, but again, super fun movie, super wild and bonkers and out there. And if you're going to watch this, get a group of friends together and watch it on a big screen that you can find. You're pretty much guaranteed to have a lot of fun with it. And our runner-up for the best movie of 2022 is going to be All Quiet on the Western Front. This is a Netflix original that sort of came out of nowhere and just blew my expectations out of the water. It's a World War I movie, but it does all of the things that a good war movie does, in that it's realistic, it's gritty, it's not overly stylized. All of the characters feel like organic, could be real people. This is also one of the few war films that I've seen that shows things from the Germans' perspective. And most of the characters in this movie aren't evil people. The movie does a great job of presenting the bleak futility of war and how human life is essentially just being used as expendable cannon fodder. Now, obviously, this isn't the first war movie to do all of those things, but it just executes it in a way that's so very powerful. There are so many just horrific scenes in this movie that stick with you after you watch the film. Again, this is another long one. I think it was about 2 hours and 40 minutes. Don't quote me on that. But this one I feel sort of earns the runtime because, man, every minute of this thing was just grueling and tense. I know Netflix has been a little bit lacking lately. In fact, a lot of their movies this year have just been total misses for me. But this one absolutely delivers. I highly recommend checking it out. But the best film of the year, there's really no other movie that could quite compete with it, is going to be Top Gun Maverick. Now, I'll admit that I'm not a huge fan of the original Top Gun. I've always just sort of seen it as an overly cheesy, melodramatic piece of 80s pulp. I know I'm not the generation that grew up with it, and those people tend to have more of an admiration for it, but I just thought it was okay. So you can imagine my surprise when I went to see this movie and found out that it was actually completely fantastic. Much in the same vein as Avatar 2, this movie takes visual spectacle to another level. It's so immersive. Like, when these characters are in these fighter jets flying around, you feel like you're in there in the cockpit too. Thankfully, the character work for the most part is really strong here too. You've got Maverick having to work with Goose's son and teach him, so there's a whole really interesting dynamic there, especially when you have a seasoned actor like Miles Teller playing him. I love everything that Miles Teller has done. Okay, I forgot that he was in the 2015 Fantastic Four. We'll actually pretend that didn't happen. The whole scene with Val Kilmer is just really emotionally effective. There's just so many things that this movie does right that so many movies don't do anymore. It does still have some of the original's cheesiness and pulpiness that I could have done without, like the repetition of the scene where they all sing Great Balls of Fire, or Maverick has this random relationship with Jennifer Connelly's character. I'm not really sure what her purpose was in the film other than they wanted to give him a romantic interest, but that's a little bit of a nitpick. It doesn't take up much time in the movie. This is an absolute crowd pleaser overall. It's so thrilling. It's so exciting. It's just one of those movies where you walk out feeling like you just got off an amusement park ride. Sometimes during watching this movie, I almost forgot that it actually is a sequel because it handles the nostalgia and combines it with the new in a way that's so well executed. And I think, judging by how much money this movie made and how long it stayed in theaters, I think this is the one this year that gave people the reason to return to cinemas. People that didn't really feel like there was a reason to go back yet. Could be because of COVID, could be because they just don't think cinema is as exciting as it used to be. Thankfully, Top Gun Maverick was here to save the day. And that's it. Those are my top 15 picks of the year. I'm excited for 2023 to see what that year holds. I plan to keep making reviews for movies as they come out, maybe just some of the bigger ones. So yeah, make sure to drop your list in the comments, or even if you just have one favorite movie of the year. I appreciate it if you leave a like. Thanks for watching, and I will see you guys in the next video.